like to call the Lewis Board of Public Works Workshop for 23 January to order. The purpose of this meeting is for the wastewater treatment facility options. So present, we have all the board members from Lewis BPW. We have from the county, Hans Medler, who's the engineer, and Todd, who's the county executive. GHD was our consultant on the project, and we have Tom Biagio here and Jeff Stuyvesant. So with that, I'd just like to make a couple of brief comments as introduction before getting started. The Lewis BPW welcomes everyone from the public and the stakeholders here. We know this project has been going on for a while. We held our last workshop in March of last year, and March of last year. At that time, we said we would take back the comments we received, do more investigations, which is when we hired GHD. To look into the viability, cost, environmental, and other aspects. Sussex County is present because one of the options is for us to combine with the county, and the county has been very, very helpful during the process up till now. The final decision does lie with the Lewis BPW. We will make the determination because this is our wastewater treatment system. Now, having said that, you as all as stakeholders are going to have a very large say into how we progress, and the Lewis BPW will then consider those along with the technical issues and make a decision. We recognize this is a very, very complex subject, dry, and not exactly, it's not going to be on Broadway soon. The engineering report, which is up online, oh, and by the way, Sharon has made a homepage for projects, and all of the material for this project is up there. And there will also be a link, there is a link there to allow you to provide any comments to be submitted. Going back to the original GHD engineering report, which was presented to the board in November of last year, was approximately 120 pages long. It's very dense. It evaluates the pros, cons, cost, environmental, regulatory aspects of each of the options. From that, a 25-page presentation was developed, which is what you all have now. It's still dense, and we recognize that. It's not in the best format for, following good PowerPoint presentations. However, we felt it was better to err with providing the information and then summarizing it at this meeting than, having people continuously looking for where the sources were. So, as everyone knows, the current wastewater treatment plant located out on American Legion Road is in a relatively low-lying area of Lewis. It currently has a design elevation of 9.6 feet, I think is the lowest elevation for the, not grade, I'm sorry, the lowest flood elevation of the plant, which puts it out of harm's way right now, but given climate change, sea level rise, the increase in storm precipitation, we know that we need to do something. We're looking to, across the board, the BPW is looking to improve the resiliency of all of our utilities. And actually, Presley is chairman of the mitigation committee for BPW. Due to the sensitive nature of the wastewater treatment plant, we are using conservative numbers. So we are using, if anyone's familiar, the high level curve for the forecast sea level rise, not the mid-level curve. And we're using 3-foot freeboard instead of 2-foot to all ensure that in the worst events, the facilities, wherever they would be located, would be safe. I think as many people know, we have an existing relationship with Sussex County. In the wintertime, we take up to 500,000 gallons of flow from their system. It helps us, the Lewis BPW, because at that time of the year, all the tourists are gone, our flows are down, and as we said, the buggies like to be fed. It also helps the county because during that time, their spray irrigation fields are not as effective because there's no crops growing. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship that we have with the county. The one thing I do want to emphasize is that, while we're going to consider the 3 options tonight with that, or 3 concepts with 6 options, it's either hardening the current facility against storm level rise or sea level rise, moving to a new higher location on our own, or combining with the county at Wolf Neck in a joint facility. The status quo is not viable. We have to do something for the long term. So we're, in the 3 to 5 year time window, we have to be prepared for what's coming. I would ask you that, to please hold off your questions till the end. We'll have adequate time at the end for questions both from the room and from online. And with that, I turn the floor over to Tom from GHD, and he'll. What's that? I'll get to that one of the questions. I have another speech.
Good evening. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Good evening, everybody. My name is Tom Biaggioli. I'm a project manager and a senior engineer with GHD, and I'll be presenting the scope in a little bit more detail. I'll be talking through some of the key study criteria, the concept development, and also the concept evaluation portions of the work that we've been doing. If I got the next slide, please. So I don't have control of the slides. One moment, please. Thank you. We have an agenda here. I think is really what I've just covered. I'll be talking through the next few stages, and then we'll get to questions and then talking about the next stages later on. Next slide, please. This is an introduction to the project and the status of where we are at the moment, and I think we've just had a good summary of that, so I won't comment on that again. This is more for the record for the slides. Okay, so getting into the study scope. So as Tom mentioned, we have 6 options that we've evaluated as part of this report, going into 3 categories. So option 1 is hardening the existing plant, and I'll come to this in more detail later, but it involves perimeter barriers around the edge of the facility to protect it from surrounding floodwaters, stormwater provisions within the site to clear rainfall that falls within the facility, and also treatment upgrades so that the facility can remain viable up to the planning horizon year of 2050. So that's option 1. The option 2 categories all relate to relocating the wastewater treatment facilities to a new high elevation site within the Lewis area. And there are 3 sub-options, and they vary based on the proposed discharge methodology for treated effluent. So under option 2A, the site would be relocated, the facility would be relocated to a new high elevation site, and treated effluent would be discharged via a land application methodology, either spray irrigation or rapid infiltration beds. Under option 2B, the site would be relocated to a high elevation facility, and then the treated effluent would be pumped back to the existing outfall location, which is in the canal here in Lewes. And under option 2C, again, a new high elevation site, and this time the treated effluent is pumped out to a new ocean outfall, which discharges the treated effluent to the ocean, away from the canal, away from the bays. The third category is option 3, which is a partnership with the county. And again, the sub-options, there are 2 sub-options, and they vary in terms of discharge methodology. Under option 3A, all the wastewater from Lewes would be transferred to a new county facility at the Wolfneck site. It would be treated along with flows from the county, and then the treated effluent would be pumped. Under option 3A, the treated effluent would be pumped back to the existing outfall here in Lewes at the same location in the canal. Under option 3B, again, the wastewater from Lewes is transferred over to the Wolfneck site, but under this option, it will be discharged via a new constructed wetland with a vertical discharge, so it wouldn't be pumped back to the outfall in Lewes. So that's a high-level overview of the options. I'll go through each one schematically as we go through the presentation. So before we get into the concepts and how we've developed them, I just want to touch on some key design criteria for the study. The first one being flood elevation. So as we've already mentioned, I think as we already know, a key driver here is to have a resilient wastewater treatment facilities here in Lewes. And so if we're going to design to specific flood elevations and to really understand the risk associated with the future facility, we need to understand what the flood risk is now. And again, this is a long-range planning study, so we need to project forward to that planning horizon of 2050 and make projections on what the flood elevations will be out into the future. So I'm going to talk you through that process and really just summarize how we've arrived at these critical values. So to undertake this task, we start with the base flood elevation, and that's defined by FEMA as the elevation of surface water resulting from a flood that has a 1% chance of equaling or exceeding that level in any given year, which is what we refer to as the 100-year flood elevation. So statistically, it would be expected to occur once every 100 years. It's established industry best practice that wastewater treatment facilities should be protected from the 100-year flood elevation. So that's why we start with the base flood elevation. And the graphic that you see on the top right-hand side of the slide is from the most recent FEMA mapping, which was completed in 2015. We've shown the outline of the existing treatment facility in red, and you may not be able to see the text, but basically the majority of the site, for the majority of the site, the 100-year flood elevation is 7 feet. Now, so the most recent mapping, the most recent modelling provided by FEMA is from 2015, and it doesn't include allowances for future climate changes or storm surges or any other change in the base flood elevation. So in order to look forward to that planning horizon, or project forward to the planning horizon of 2050, we also need to consider relative sea level rise into the future, anything that may increase that flood elevation and increase the risk of the treatment facilities in the future. So as part of our work, we did a review of the latest modelling, the latest projections for the Lewes area, to come up with a conservative, high-level estimate of the relative sea level rise in the year 2050. Now, that value of relative sea level rise has 2 components. One is the eustatic sea level rise, which is an increase in the elevation of the oceans globally, primarily caused by melting land ice, as well as thermal expansions of the world's oceans. And the high-level curve for that value in the Lewes area in the year 2050 is 2.13 feet. The other component is coastal subsidence. So as well as sea levels increasing, the land mass, particularly in coastal areas, is also sinking due to a number of factors. And again, the latest high-level curves for the projections for the Lewes area have the estimated coastal subsidence to 2050 at 0.26 feet. So in order to get to our estimated 2050 100-year design flood elevation, which is critical to developing all of the concepts, we take the most recently published FEMA base flood elevation, We add the elements of the relative sea level rise, and it's summarized in this table. We come to the figure of 9.39. So for all the concepts that have been developed, we're assuming that on our planning horizon, the 100-year flood elevation in the Lewis area will be 9.39 feet. Then, having established the flood elevation, we then need to consider freeboard. So we as GHD, we define freeboard as the recommended vertical offset from a flood elevation to building thresholds, equipment elevation, and other critical components. So it's a way for us to compare the actual elevation where something sits to the projected flood elevation, and it gives us a good measure of the risk that the building or the equipment will become damaged in a severe flood event. Now, in terms of freeboard, we have two categories. So firstly, we look at structural slabs and building elevations. And in that instance, we recommend a freeboard value of 2 feet from the flood elevation up to the minimum what we would consider a resilient elevation for structural slabs and building thresholds. And the value of 2 feet is in line with the recommendations of the American Society of Civil Engineers, which recommends that all wastewater treatment facility buildings should be provided with a 2-foot freeboard from the base flood elevation. And we've used that throughout the concept development. The other value is the freeboard to critical equipment. And in this case, we go a little bit further. We recommend a value of 3 feet from the 100-year flood elevation up to the critical equipment. Now that is based primarily on an executive order, which is Executive Order 13690 from the Federal Flood Risk Management Standard. And that outlines that federally funded projects, for all federally funded projects, critical equipment should be located at 3 feet above the base flood elevation. So while that is only strictly enforceable for federally funded projects, we as GHD consider that a good, robust approach for concept development, again in line with industry standards, and it's what we've used for the development of all of the concepts. So that's quite a lot of detail there, but we just wanted to present how we arrived at some of these key values, which basically dictate a lot of the information that you're going to see moving forward. And then the next key criteria are wastewater flow rates. So the existing treatment facility here in Lewis is rated for an average day flow of 1.5 MGD, million gallons per day. I'll just make a note here, and this will be, I'll come back to this in further slides. The current observed average daily flow is actually down at around 0.9 MGD. So currently the treatment facility typically operates at about 60% of the rated capacity. Now the BPW has conservatively estimated that, and on the assumption that all available lots are developed per the current zoning designation, the 2050 average day flow will increase from 1.5 million gallons per day to 1.75 million gallons per day. So the concept arrangements for all of the options that we'll discuss today have been developed assuming an average day flow from the Lewis collection network of 1.75 MGD. Under the option 3 scenarios, so the partnership with the county, these have all been developed on the assumption that the county in the new facility will contribute an equal proportion of the flow rate to the new facility. So we assume 1.75 from Lewis and 1.75 from the county to give a total 2050 average day flow for the option 3 facilities of 3.5 MGD. Next slide, please. So the other key criteria is water quality, specifically the water quality for treated effluent. The overriding design criteria and the key assumption that underpins all of the concepts is that irrespective of the option, the future wastewater treatment facility will meet all of the conditions of the existing permit. Now under the option 1 concept, which is to improve the existing treatment facility, that would maintain the existing membrane bioreactor or MBR treatment process. Under option 2 and the option 3 concepts, they were developed on the basis of an activated sludge treatment facility with tertiary effluent filtration. I'm not going to go into the details specifically on how they differ, but under both technologies, they're both established technologies, and under both methodologies, it's feasible to meet that criteria, so to meet all of the conditions of the existing permit even at the increased flow rates that we project in 2050. Now, I also want to talk about and make some comments on the relationship between the performance of the existing wastewater treatment facility today, how that relates to the existing permit, and how that in turn relates to the future wastewater treatment facility performance. So as I noted before, the existing treatment facility operates at about 60% of the design capacity. And when a treatment facility is operating under those conditions, you get much longer retention time in aeration basins, and the key treatment equipment, process equipment, is loaded at a rate which is significantly below its upper limits. Consequently, today, with the average day flows that are seen at the facility consistently maintains nutrient concentrations, specifically total nitrogen and total phosphorus, that are consistently below the existing permit limit. That's on the flows that are typically seen today. However, this is a long-range planning study, and we project, and the BPW projects, that at some point between today and the year 2050, the average day flow observed at the facility will trend towards the design capacity of 1.5 mgd. And as the flow rates increase towards the design capacity, the nutrient concentrations in the treated effluent will also trend towards those permit limits. That's what it's designed to do. So whilst at the moment the concentrations are observed to be very low, that is not how it will be as the flow rates increase. So I just wanted to get that context. In terms of the future facilities, under all of the options, under every option we are proposing to increase the capacity in terms of the flow rate. Now, in order to meet the conditions of the existing permit, both in terms of the total pounds of nitrogen and phosphorus that are discharged in the treated effluent, and also the concentrations of those chemicals, to increase the flow and maintain the same total quantity of chemicals means that we will actually, there will be a commitment to maintain lower total nitrogen and total phosphorus concentrations compared with the existing permit limits. And I would just stress that that's the permit limits. That doesn't necessarily mean that in the future the treated effluent nutrient concentrations will be the same or lower than they are today. But again, that's because currently the facility runs well below the design capacity. But a future facility will provide those, will maintain those concentrations below the permit limits. And we anticipate that there may be some additional questions on that, so we provided some more information towards the back of the handout. And if there are questions on that later, I'll be happy to discuss that in some more detail. So those are the key criteria that we use to develop the concepts. Now I'm going to talk through each one in turn. Now I'm going to talk through each one. So we'll start with option one, which is hardening of the existing plant. Now on the handouts and on the slides, and the top left-hand side, we have some simplified schematics for how each of the concepts will work. And so I'll start by talking through that. The two orange boxes are the two parts of the Lewis collection network, which broadly speaking is split into two halves, the northern network and the southern network, either side of the canal. Each part of the collection network currently terminate at a lift pumping station. So the southern collection network ends at lift station number 4, which is on Gills Neck Road, close to the bridge on Savannah Road, right in the centre of the city. And the northern collection network terminates at lift station number 8, which is on American Legion Road, close to the treatment facility site. Both of those pump stations then transfer the flows into the existing wastewater treatment facility, which discharges via the existing permitted outfall. So under option 1, the key upgrades associated with option 1 are hardening of this facility from a stormwater perspective. So the key features of that are a perimeter barrier, which I'll talk about in a bit more detail shortly, and a stormwater pump station to clear runoff from within the site. There are also facility upgrades, process upgrades that are required for the existing site to be able to treat the projected flows in the future. And they include new headworks facilities to remove screenings and grit, increased flow equalization capacity to better buffer flows, expanded aeration basins to provide the adequate storage at average daily flow, installation of a further membrane bioreactor cassette to provide the necessary treatment capacity, and replacement of the existing UV reactors, which provide disinfection at the downstream end of the plant. Now, an important point to note with option 1 is that under this scenario, the treatment facility itself will be projected from surrounding flood events, and it will be operable, and the site itself will be operable. However, additional emergency plans and arrangements would still be required and would need to be developed by the BPW so that, to enable personnel and equipment and materials to get to the site during a flood event. So while the site itself may be functional, may operate, it would still be a situation where there's a wastewater treatment facility in a vulnerable area, and additional plans and additional effort is required to get the necessary resources there to keep it operational. So there is some residual risk, quite considerable residual risk with this option, which factors into the evaluation, which I'll talk you through later. But I just wanted to make that point. Some additional details on the proposed upgrades. Show an expanded plan here, showing the perimeter, and in the top right-hand side, we're showing a typical section through a compacted fill flood barrier. And this would be compacted fill with a polyethylene with a plastic liner on the external side to provide waterproofing. Also a trench where the barrier would extend down into the ground to prevent floodwaters passing beneath the barrier, and a drain on the inside. Now, this is the preferable approach because it's cost effective and it will provide the necessary protection up to those flood elevations that I discussed earlier. However, in order to provide those threshold elevations, the barrier with the slopes as shown, which could be maintained, would be about 30 feet wide. So there are certain parts of the plant where, without considerably changing the location of the site fence, it's not possible to install a barrier that wide. So in those locations, we're showing a sheet pile barrier, which are the sort of bold, thin lines on the graphic. That would be up to the same elevation, provide the same level of protection, but with a smaller footprint. It's not as preferable as the compacted fill on a cost basis. So wherever possible, we use the barrier, otherwise it would be a sheet pile. There'd also be a stormwater pump station, which would just transfer flows over the barrier. And then the process upgrades are shown in the green boxes. As you can see, the key areas of the site that would need to be upgraded. There's a lot more detail available on this within the report. And again, if there are any questions later on, I'd be happy to talk through any of the more specific items. Okay, now we're into option 2, which is option 2A. So to relocate the plant to a high elevation site and discharge via spray irrigation. So I'm going to start by talking through a similar graphic, which shows the northern and southern collection network either side of the canal. So under the option 2 concepts, a key part of the option 2 concepts, in order to transfer the raw wastewater from the Lewis collection network up to a new site, we need to consolidate it all at a single pump station. And so our preference would be to expand lift station 8, which is north of the canal, and make that the consolidated pump station, which would transfer all of the wastewater from the Lewis collection network up to the high elevation site. The reason for choosing lift station 8 rather than lift station 4 is that lift station 4 is right in the centre of the city. It will be a lot more disruptive. During construction and in future maintenance, it's much more visible, whereas lift station 8 is a little bit more out of the way on American Legion Road. So under all of the option 2 concepts, a new raw wastewater pumping station would be constructed at the same site as LS8 on American Legion Road. Transfer flows up to a new wastewater treatment facility, which would be an activated sludge facility. And under option 2A, the treated effluent would be discharged via spray irrigation. We don't have specific sites identified for this. This is a concept level review, but we have done some sizing to determine the extent of the land that will be required to discharge the treated effluent. And we estimate that the total site area required for treatment facilities and land application is 250 acres. Now, this doesn't have to be a single plot of 250 acres. It could be 3 or 4 plots, 4 or 5. It doesn't have to be contiguous. But that's the total land area required to undertake the treatment and then to discharge it to a land application. Slide, please. Here I just have a graphic showing what the treatment part of the facility would look like. So in the top left-hand corner, this is common to all option 2 concepts, and it shows the key treatment facilities that will be required at the new site. And that's only a proportion of the land required under option 2A. So that includes the headworks, the aeration basins, clarifiers, and filtration and disinfection at the downstream end. And that's within the light blue dashed box in the top left-hand side. Under option 2A, per the DENREC requirements, we would also provide 45 days storage at average day flow for treated effluent before it goes to the spray application. And that's why there are the additional effluent storage lagoons in this option, and require just over 80 million gallons. There will then be an effluent pump station, which will transfer the treated effluent off to the land application sites, which are not shown on this graphic. So under option 2B, again, and I'll start by talking about the schematic on the left-hand side. Again, the Lewis flows will be consolidated at an upgraded lift station 8 pump station, transferred to a new high elevation site. But this time, rather than land application, there will be a new transfer pump station which will pump the treated effluent back to the existing permitted outfall on the canal here in Lewis. The other graphic I'm showing here is a schematic arrangement for the new consolidated pump station. And I won't go into all the detail on this, and happy to answer questions later, but the key point is, on the existing site, where the existing lift station 8 is, the new larger facility could be constructed offline, and then all the piping connections made at the last minute, or the last possible moment, to minimise the disruption on treatment facilities during the construction phase. So that's option 2B. Under option 2C, again, the flows are consolidated at an expanded raw wastewater pump station to a new high elevation site, but this time the treated effluent transfer pump station takes flows out and discharges via a new ocean outfall. And in the diagram on the right-hand side, it shows a potential alignment for a treated effluent force main. So I'm just going to talk through the key components of that briefly. So the section shown in green along East Savannah Road that comes past the wastewater treatment facilities, that will be the first section. So come up the same road towards the beachside areas. The section in yellow would pass through Cape Henlopen State Park, although it would be installed within Cape Henlopen Drive, which is already a paved road. So although it goes through the state park, it would be installed within essentially already a paved area. And then the final section, shown in red, from the existing parking lot out offshore, would be the new ocean outfall section. And based on comparable arrangements in the region, we have made an assumption that would need to be 6,000 linear feet offshore to get it out of the beach zone. That's option 2C. So now into the option 3 arrangements, which is the partnership with Sussex County. So under these scenarios, again, we show the Lewis collection network and its 2 components, and the flows being consolidated at an upgraded lift pump station 8. Just excuse me a moment. But under option 3, rather than going to a high elevation site within Lewis, the flows are transferred to a new county facility at the existing Wolf Neck site. Schematically here, we show the Lewis BPW Sussex County boundary. So as Tom mentioned, as you're already aware, there is an existing agreement in place which has an existing scope boundary, and all works on the Lewis side of the boundary are the responsibility of the BPW, and in terms of capital expenditure, and on the county side, vice versa, it's the county responsibility. I'll just mention that now because that will become relevant when I talk through the cost estimates. So we have the Lewis collection network sent to the new site, and then I'm also showing here a component of the Sussex County collection network, and this concept has been developed on the assumption that the county will contribute the same proportion of the flow, so 1.75 MGD from the county network, as well as the 1.75 MGD coming from Lewis. Under option 3A, flows will be treated at the new site, and again there's a new transfer pump station. It'll transfer flows back across the scope boundary to the existing permitted outfall. Now the permitted outfall will be relocated, but just to the opposite bank of the canal. So it'll be the same point in the canal, so it'll be the same permit, it'll be physically relocated, but in terms of permitting, it's the same treated effluent outfall. And a key component, a couple of key points. The new wastewater treatment facility will be owned and operated by Sussex County. And the treated effluent pump station will be configured to only discharge on the outgoing tide. So that any chemicals that are present in the treated effluent would tend to be taken out on the tides away from the canals. Okay. And option 3B, very similar, except for the discharge methodology. So rather than pumping back to the existing permitted outfall, will be discharged via a constructed wetland. Sorry. And again, the new facility will be owned and operated by the county, and treated effluent will be discharged on the outgoing tides. Okay, so that's a high-level overview of each of the concepts and how they were developed. Now I'm going to talk you through the concept evaluation, which has two component parts. So we look at we do a cost evaluation, which I'll get to shortly. And we also have undertaken a multi-criteria analysis, or an MCA. And the purposes of the MCA is to evaluate each of the concept arrangements based on a series of non-cost criteria. So clearly, cost is always a factor, but before we focus on the financial implications, we also like to evaluate each of the concepts on its own merits. In what ways is it able to meet the aims of the project, and in what ways is it potentially lacking? So the approach for the MCA is that we developed a series of evaluation criteria, performance measures, and a rating scale, which we use to evaluate each of the concepts. And in terms of the rating, under an MCA approach, a high score is good. So if we rate things from 1 to 5, a rating of 5 would mean that a concept, under a certain criteria, will perform better than the other options that we're evaluating. And vice versa, 1 would be that it will perform much worse. So that's the rating, and then we also assign a weighting, which is to reflect the relative criticality of each item. So not all criteria are equal in terms of how we evaluate this. So, for example, longer-term impacts, water quality issues, and treatment facility resilience are really the critical criteria in terms of what we're trying to achieve with these upgrades. So they are assigned a higher weighting. The weightings go from 1 to 3. So 1 is sort of baseline, is default. Yeah, it's an important criteria. It's part of the evaluation. It's being considered. But then a weighting of 2 or 3 means it's more important, and then a rating of 3 is the most critical criteria. And the way we develop an MCA score is that we multiply the weighting by the rating. So, for example, delivery schedule has a weighting of 2 if an option is graded a 5, 2 times 5. So the MCA score for that particular criteria is 10 under that scenario. Trying to give a high-level overview. Hopefully that's clear. Generally speaking, shorter-term impacts, so temporary disruption due to construction or issues related with permitting and interagency regulation are generally assigned lower weightings. Now, again, I would just stress that doesn't mean that they're not important or that they've been disregarded. It's just that it means that relative to other criteria, it's not as critical to achieving the project aims. So I'm going to talk you through the evaluation criteria that we used, and they fall into three categories. First category is permitting and schedule. And within that category, we have permitting complexity, so the expected volume and complexity of the permitting procedures. We have the delivery schedule, so the length of the overall project implementation schedule from design through to construction and commissioning. Property and easement acquisition, so particularly for option 2, the complexity of obtaining the required additional property, and the easements for treatment facilities and conveyance piping. So with all these transfer pump stations, force mains going across the area, they will predominantly be installed in public roads. It all needs easements for future operation and maintenance purposes. And the last one, the permitting schedule, is interagency regulation and coordination. This really relates to schedule risk about needing to coordinate between different regulatory bodies. Second category is community and environmental impacts, which is the biggest and the most critical category. So these criteria include stakeholder impacts in the construction stage, so temporary impacts to the community, predominantly due to traffic volume, road closures, noise, other factors associated with construction. Another criteria is long-term stakeholder impacts. So that could be, again, ongoing site traffic, site odor, aesthetics, and any other factors peculiar to a particular concept. Water quality impacts for inland bays. This is one of the most critical criteria. So the likelihood that the proposed treatment process will negatively impact the water quality of the inland bays. Equally, another critical criteria is overall environmental risk. So the likelihood of an environmental impact due to failure or flood damage at the treatment facilities, force mains, or any of the pumping facilities. Then we have sustainability, energy and chemical use, relatively self-explanatory, and land use within the city. So the amount of land required and how that may impact other plans that may be in place for future land use within the city. And the final category relates to operation and maintenance, so post-construction. So the first criteria is impact to the wastewater treatment facilities during construction. So in undertaking any of these upgrades, do we compromise the treatment facilities in the short term? We also have operational complexity, which is the level of operational effort required to maintain the treatment facility performance, and the difficulty in obtaining qualified staff, which has been a significant issue for the existing treatment facility. So that's another critical criteria. And the final one is future flexibility. Sorry, pardon me. So this is a long-range planning study. So we have made projections based on the current modelling and current thinking. We've come up with concepts that we think will address the long-term requirements. But should things change in the future, it would certainly be favourable if an upgrade option could be adapted to have some flexibility and meet those future constraints. Okay, so those are criteria and the categories that they fall into. Now I'm going to give an overview of the MCA scoring. So the detailed scoring and the rationale for all the scoring is provided in detail in the report, which is on the BPW website. I'm going to give you a high-level overview of the key findings. Now, the graphic on the right-hand side summarises the scoring. And in terms of an MCA evaluation, it's an interesting result. Thank you. It's an interesting result in that there are clearly two sort of levels of total score. The option 1 and option 2 criteria all scored 65 or 66, and the option 3 both score 95. So although a lot of the total scores are consistent between options, the makeup of each of those scores is different in each case. So you notice the bars are split into different colours. Each different colour relates to one of the MCA categories. So permitting and schedule, community and environmental impacts, and operation and maintenance. So option 3A and option 3B, as you can see, have the joint highest MCA scores. Option 3A scores higher for the permitting and schedule category. And this is due to the relative uncertainty associated with the constructed wetland discharge arrangement under option 3B. So in order to fully understand what that concept would look like and how it would perform, there's additional field investigations that need to be undertaken and additional engineering analysis. And for that reason, we can't score that concept with the same confidence as discharging via an existing permitted outfall. Option 3B scores higher than option 3A for community environmental impacts. And that's because through discharging through a wetland, there's no requirement to pump treated effluent back to the canal in Lewes. So the option 1 and option 2 concepts have very similar overall scores. Option 1 scores lower for community and environmental impacts due to the residual risk of flood risk at the existing site. So as I talked about earlier, we can make those improvements, but there's still a treatment facility, a critical facility in a vulnerable location. Option 2 concepts typically score lower for permitting and schedule. That's due to land acquisition and significant lengths of transfer force mains required, which predominantly be in public roads. Option 2C scores particularly low in this category due to the complexities associated with constructing a new ocean outfall, particularly through the state park. However, option 2C scores high in community and environmental impacts as the treated effluent is discharged out to the ocean, away from the canal and away from the bays. So that's a high-level view of the outcome of the NCA analysis. The second part of the evaluation is cost. And within cost, we also have several components. The first is the capital costs, which are the upfront costs, which I'll talk you through in a moment. And the second part are the operation and maintenance, the ongoing running costs for a new facility. So I'll start by talking about the capital costs. So we developed the concepts, we've done some preliminary sizing, and then we've gone through and costed the key components of each option. And I'll just note here that the costs presented are the costs that will be incurred by the BPW only. Any costs incurred by Sussex County under the option 3 scenarios are not included in the analysis. These are all costs to the BPW. So we look at any land purchase that's required, demolition, decommissioning of the existing wastewater treatment facility, network upgrades, which is pump station upgrades, as well as transfer force mains, site civils, predominantly excavation, site roads, architectural, heating and ventilation costs, so essentially the costs associated with new site buildings, structural concrete, tanks, slabs, other things, mechanical and process equipment, and electrical upgrades. General conditions is a component that's common for large construction projects. It represents the cost to a contractor associated with mobilising, demobilising, setting up site facilities, contractor overheads, that kind of thing, and that's really a function of the other costs. So we tally those up to a construction subtotal. Now, this is a concept level study. It's very early in the process, and there's a lot that we still don't know and more analysis that we need to do. And so at this stage, we need to include a contingency to allow for some of that uncertainty. And given the stage that we're at and the information we have available, we as GHD consider that a 35% contingency is appropriate. So we provide a 35% uplift to all the subtotals to give a construction total. And that's just the cost to build the facilities. To get from the concept arrangements, which I presented today, through design and planning, through construction, commissioning, to a fully functioning treatment facility, will also occur some additional costs on top, and specifically legal, administrative, and engineering costs. And for schemes like this, we consider a robust conservative figure to be a 25% uplift on top of the construction total. So that gives us a total preliminary capital cost estimate for each option, which is shown at the bottom line of your handouts and up on the slides. Now, the bottom line costs vary from around 20 million with option 1 and the 2 option 3 arrangements to in excess of 100 million for the option 2 arrangements. Now, a note on the option 3 costs. Again, these are only the costs incurred by the BPW. So in this case, that specifically means the costs of decommissioning the existing treatment facility, the costs of upgrading lift station 8 to pump the consolidated flows, and the costs of installing the transfer force main from the updated pump station to the existing agreed BPW county scope boundary. Costs on the other side of the boundary would be incurred by the county under this scenario. And that's why the costs for option 3A, as seen by BPW, are lower than for all of the other options. And so that's the capital cost. The second component are the O&M costs. And again, we're just presenting the costs incurred by the BPW, not the county. So we start this evaluation by estimating the annual operation and maintenance costs for each option. And these are presented in 2022 US dollars, because that's where we completed the report a few months ago. And there are three categories. So there's the treatment facility operation and maintenance, so the cost of staffing, the cost of energy, cost of chemicals to run the facility day to day. There's also periodic equipment replacement, which again, depending on the type of facility, if there's more complex equipment or equipment with a shorter operational life, more moving parts, etc., it needs to be replaced more frequently, and then we represent that as an annual cost over the lifespan of the facility. And the third category is transfer pump station energy use, so the costs associated with moving wastewater between different sites. And the key differentiator in the annual costs really are the operation and maintenance costs associated with option one. That's because option one would maintain the existing membrane bioreactor facility. It's a more complex facility, and based on observations that we have in the region of the cost to run a facility like that, compared with an activated sludge facility, it's generally a more costly process to run, and that's reflected in these figures. A note on the option 3A and option 3B. Thank you. Just take another moment. Per the existing BPW county agreement, the BPW would pay a proportion of the running costs for the new facility equal to the proportion of the flow contributed from the Lewis collection network, which, as I mentioned earlier, would be a 50-50 split. So these costs are 50% of the total running costs of the new facility under the option 3 scenario. So that's the first stage, to estimate the annual operation and maintenance costs. We then complete a 2050 net present value operation and maintenance cost. And this is an estimate of the total cumulative O&M expenditure, including allowance for inflation up to the year 2050. So the total cost to the BPW of running that facility all the way to the planning horizon in the future. And you can see the results here in the graphic. Option 1 is the most expensive, again being an MBR process, in excess of 70 million. The option 2 scenarios are all around 40 million. And under option 3A, option 3B, be 36 million. So let's try and bring all that together. We then take the two components of the cost estimates, the capital costs and the net present value cumulative running costs, and we come up with a project lifecycle cost. So the total cost to the BPW to design, plan, build the new facility, and then run it up to the year 2050. So we add together the two individual cost components, and that gives the project lifecycle costs presented in the graphic in the handout. And they vary from close to 56 million for the option 3 scenarios, and option 1 is up to close to 100 million, and the option 2 scenarios are significantly more, 150 million plus. And the project lifecycle costs are at the middle row of the summary table. We're also showing here the MCA scores that were presented earlier, and then to try and bring the two components of the evaluation together and to give an indication of the best value for money option to the BPW, we take the project lifecycle cost and we divide it by the MCA score to come up with a cost per MCA scoring point. Now the option 3 concepts are the lowest cost and they have the highest MCA score, so it follows that based on the criteria that were established and based on this evaluation, the option 3 concepts would provide the best value to the BPW. And at that point, I will hand back to the BPW, I believe Austin, to talk you through the estimated ratepayer impact.
So just so everybody knows, there's a test at the end, so I hope everybody's taking notes. So when we took a look at this, one of the things that had come up, and we had talked about it, Tom had actually brought it up at the public workshop that we had when GHD first gave us the presentation, is that obviously there's an interest in what the impact's gonna be to a customer. So what we tried to do is break it down as a percentage impact so that you guys could each go home and take a look at your sewer-only portion of your bill and then calculate out what each impact would be to their bill. So for example, if you're doing a 55% increase, you're gonna take whatever your bill is times 55% and add that, and that's what your increase is gonna be. And you swing all the way up to a 400 plus increase, so you would be 4 times whatever your bill is. Obviously, when you have a swing of cost from $20 million to $187 million, those are some big numbers that we're throwing around there. We also took into consideration that, the funding source for this, if we went to the WE Act today, it would probably be something that, they would probably get their eyes crossed on because of the magnitude of cost here. But we threw in, like, for example, if we were to finance this project 3% at 20 years. And that's more on the conservative side because most of the loans recently have been around 2%. So we tried to give the best estimate that we could at a conceptual level so that you guys could really see the true impact. Again, there's a lot of assumptions because this is only what we know as of today. It assumes no future projects, no issues as it comes up. The existing capital budget that we have today, obviously it changes as the years go on. So it tries to give you the best representation of what that impact's going to be. Last one, conclusion. Right?
Very quick, the next slide, please.
Okay, so I think just as a very, very high-level summary to what was presented, and then we'll get into the questions. The 3 options that are being considered all have pros and cons. Option 1 is on the lower cost side, but as was pointed out, it does not eliminate the risk of it being in a susceptible area. It does reuse the existing facility, and it has a lower regulatory hurdle because it's already licensed. There is the potential for construction interference on the site because we're going to be building berms, driving piles, building a new oxidation ditch on the existing site. So it does make construction more complicated. It's not prohibitive, but it's just one of those things, it's not a greenfield site. And as pointed out by Tom, of all the options, it's got the highest ongoing operating cost due to the use of the membrane systems, which use more energy. They draw vacuums and pressures, and it takes more to operate that plant electrically than the other ones. Option 2, it's remote from the ocean and at a higher elevation is the sites we would choose. So you're less at risk from, sea level rise and those and hurricanes and such. As was pointed out by Tom, it can be built offline so that you can have the whole facility up, running, and tested, and then just tie it in. It does have the highest capital cost due to both land acquisition and the cost of running the length of piping to and from the facility. Option 3, one of the big benefits, as Tom pointed out, was that it would be discharging on the outgoing tide. So what that means, to everyone is that the lagoons would hold the effluent, the treated effluent, and when the tides were going out, they would discharge, and it would get flushed through the canal into the bay and out to the ocean. So currently our plant operates by discharging 24/7. So whether it's an incoming tide or an outgoing tide, it's still discharging. And then, the option 3 would also be lower cost operations because it would not be using an MBR, it would be using other types of tertiary treatment. So just to try to, once again, take a very complex topic and digest it down. So at this point, we're gonna open it up to questions, both from the floor and from online. I think, Josh, we're running what, 50? A 60-second delay. So maybe we should take questions from the room and allow people to start asking their questions, and then we can fill in with that. I asked you to limit your questions to approximately 2 minutes. If we go around, then we can go back and allow more. But we also, as I said, are going to take questions, comments from the public till February 3rd, close of business. You could submit them online through the webpage, send them by email, in person, carrier pigeon, however you like. And we're here to listen tonight. If the questions can be easily answered, we will. Otherwise, we will post the responses also on the BPW homepage. So at that point, I'm going to open it up for questions. And so the first one.
We're gonna have a mic or do that.
Oh, yeah. And so if you could please come up to the microphone.
Oh, he's got one.
Oh. And, if you can state your name and your address.
Yes, Mike Taylor's the name, live at Cape Port Louis, right here by the ferry. What was the impact with Sandy when it hit? How scary was that in your analysis? What was the impact to our facility here?
Well, I mean, and Austin and President chime in, but, Sandy wound up not impacting us really at all, but it was by the luck of the draw, the fact that it went 30 miles north. So anyone who saw the first incoming tide before Sandy ever hit, it was very high, but then we were having easterly winds, which blew it offshore. So, but I would not use that as,
I was just wondering, Murphy's Law is, I've seen it through the ages, has, that Sandy, we were lucky, but the impact overall in the next 30 years, who knows? Anyway.
If you look at the sea level rise associated with Sandy, when it hit New York, it was 13.8 feet. When it hit New Jersey, it was 14 foot. Each of those, would be above some of the numbers that you've seen. So that's a good question.
Yeah.
Where Barbara and I live, we'd be swimming. Yes.
I would be too, by the way.
You need a boat.
Roy Fitzgerald, Roy Fitzgerald, Massachusetts Avenue, Lewis Beach. 3 questions, I'll be brief. 1, are you considering solar energy or other sustainable energy sources? 2, what about the climate effects on the county facility for option 3? 3, are we concerned about shifting control of the entire sewage treatment system from the city to the county?
First, as I mentioned earlier on, Presley is leading up a mitigation team for the BPW, and that is considering all of our utilities. We have looked into solar. We are looking at battery storage, but that's not the subject of tonight's meeting. Question 2 was,
County
Climate
resiliency.
effects on the county.
yeah, I think,
The minimum elevation at the county facility would be over 13 feet ground elevation, so the sea level rise is not a concern for the facility.
and we would, if we chose option 2, we would ensure that it was also that way. And question 3 was?
Concerns about the county.
Are we concerned about shifting
Oh.
control?
So Lewis BPW is going to be the owner and operator of the sewage collection system under any of these options. And we would be transferring under option 3 at a handshake point to the county, and they would be treating wastewater only. They would not take over our pump stations, our sewer network. You know, you still would be customers of the Lewis BPW, billed by BPW.
Correct, and the way that it's set up now is we have a contract operator for both the wastewater treatment plant and the surrounding pump station. So when Tom was mentioning that, should there become an agreement about running the pump stations, that's yet to be determined, and that'll be determined at a later date.
Right.
Hi, Thierry Poret,
Thierry.
and I live near the canal in Lewis. I have two questions. You talked here basically of the cost for Lewis BPW. I was wondering, is there going to be additional cost which is going to be absorbed by Sussex County, which may come back to Lewis taxpayers in the form of higher taxes from Sussex County? And the second question is related to the footprint of the facility in Lewis, the facility that is near the beaches. Is the size of that facility, I think you've mentioned that, but it's not very clear in my mind. Is the facility going to be smaller if we take option 3 or 2, one of the options 3 or 2? I understand under option A it's not going to get smaller, but under option 2 or 3, is the facility actually going to get smaller and some land being returned for other uses?
So let me take a crack at it, and then if we were to size option 2, we would be in discussions with the county because they've indicated that they would like some additional capacity also. Option 3, as was pointed out by Tom, you know, the sizing of that rebuilt Wolf Neck plant would be 175 million gallons a day for us and 175 million gallons for the county.
1.75.
Oh. Pardon me, it's been a long day. The facilities would be sized as, you know, mutually advantageous. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but.
Not really. I was thinking of specifically the facility that we have today, BPW has, by the beach in Lewis, in the town of Lewis. Will that facility under any of these options become smaller because it is relocated or whatever, and the land that is there returned partially for other usage, to build houses or whatever?
If we went to option 2 or 3, both those include demolition costs for the current facility and restoring it back to its pristine site.
Okay.
What would happen with it at that point, we have not determined.
Okay, but you would return land basically for other uses, that's what you're saying?
The plant would be demolished,
Yeah,
yes.
that's my question. And then the second one, are there any residual costs that are going to be absorbed by Sussex County, which will not be paid by the ratepayers who buy water from Sussex County, but transferred back to the residents of Lewis by way of taxes?
So are our rates going to go up because of, our taxes going to go up because of the county operating our system? Is that what you're saying?
No, I understand all your cost estimates here, and particularly on page 5, where you list the impact for the price of water, basically. You say the price of water under option 3B or 3A, which are the cheapest options as presented here, the price of water in the city might go up by maximum 15%. That's before inflation, okay? And you say that for option 2A, it could be up to 140 to 155%. So all this, I understand, it's the price of water. What I'm asking is, besides the price of water, is there costs that flow through the tax mechanism, property taxes, not through the price of water?
So before I turn it over to Todd or Hans, as was said, the cost of operating that plant, the total cost of operating and maintaining that plant would be split 50-50, and it's already in the calculations here.
Okay.
So now, the question is, would there be any, I'll use the term, other charges, hidden charges coming through from the county?
You wanna speak to
Hi, the short answer is no. The county's sewer system, enterprise system, is holistically separate from its tax system. So your county property taxes, which is only 10% of your county tax bill, goes to pay for the other government functions. It has nothing to do and does not pay for any of our sewer operations. It's all absorbed by our sewer customers spread throughout the county.
I looked at the budget that the county has versus BPW from 2020 to 2025. Their budget is $211 million. Ours is $6 million. So these guys, again, and you're paying for it out of the revenue that you guys generate. So I think there's value in that on both sides.
Hi, I'm Alan Roth on Kings Highway. I want to follow up on this gentleman's question because I'm confused about something in the report. In option 3, if I'm reading this correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, it says concept development for a new combined WWTF at Wolf Neck is not included in the scope of the report. If I understand that correctly, that means there's going to be a new plant built by Sussex County. Is that right?
Yes, that's the assumption. Yes,
But
at the Wolf Neck site.
But the cost of building that new plant, the capital cost of building that new plant is not included in this report.
So the costs included in the report are only the costs that BPW will be responsible for.
No. All right, let me phrase this differently. There will be a cost to Sussex County of building a new plant. I'm going to presume for argument's sake that they're going to finance that using debt in some way or other. You're going to pay for that plant somehow, probably by financing it. No. How are you going to pay for it?
The county has various already existing functions we have for our plant upgrades. So we believe we would only finance a small portion of the treatment plant upgrade.
And will any, in some way or other, whether it's buried in what you call operations and maintenance or through some other way, are any of the costs for financing that plant going to be charged back to Lewis ratepayers?
No, that was never the intent. It's not the intent now. You pay for the 50% portion of the operation and maintenance. Does not include any potential debt service. Because there's no debt component in your part of the equation. That's our problem.
And you're saying there's not going to be any separate, in other words, in all of these calculations, there's not any separate charge back to, or apart from these calculations, there's not any separate charge back to Lewis ratepayers that's not included in these numbers?
No, they're not. I mean,
So can we take some, do we have any questions online, Josh?
Okay, so we have, is the county still planning to reduce their capacity at Wolf Neck by switching to tertiary treatment?
the question is still reducing. I mean, like, who says we are reducing our capacity at Wolf Neck? I mean, the question is, right now we have a capacity which is well above 1.75. The county committed in the permit application for the renewal of Wolf Neck to limit the spray site to 1.75. The selection to point 1.75 gives us the full operational flexibility. So we could spray or we could discharge. That's really, if you're running a spray irrigation plant, 100% flexible operational options is the best of all worlds. So we are very much interested in that. So that's the short and the long answer.
My name's Kevin McGinnis. I live on 1108 Bay Avenue. Just a quick factual question. Also just wanted to say thank you for putting this together, for sharing these materials, and for keeping it only about 800 feet above my head. I just wanted to have a quick question about option one. If I understand correctly, you're talking about a 30-foot wide berm that I think I saw it's approximately 12 feet high that would encircle the whole existing facility. Is that correct?
Well, I think as Tom had showed, it would encircle probably 60%, and the rest of it's sheet pilings.
Yes, there would be a perimeter barrier around the entire site, and something I didn't mention as I went through the slides is that there would also be a vehicle access ramp
So that
tied to the existing roads. Yeah.
So you would, and then I assume the side facing Savannah Road, would that be where the 30-foot would be?
Yes, that's one of the proportions, and then also a proportion of the perimeter on American Legion Road as well,
Okay.
wherever
then
it
you're
fits.
gonna-
Basically.
And then this will be all covered, you said, in plastic?
No, so the plastic would be within the berm. It wouldn't be visible. The berm would be seeded, and it would be a grass finish.
Okay, oh, a grass thing, and then there would be a road that would go over it?
Yes, so a vehicle access ramp at 1 in 20 slope, which is the slope required for large vehicles that are required to operate and maintain the facility. And we show it, so I don't have the graphic up, but it's the sort of dark blue ramp section, and it ties into American Legion Road. And we've looked at the geometry, and we think it's feasible to get it up and over the new perimeter barrier, then come down the other side at the same slope, and tie into the existing site roads for those large vehicles.
Just assuming that will be a fairly sizable crossing.
It will be, yeah. It's going to be.
Given the weight of the trucks involved and the dirt berm.
Yeah, it will be close to a 300-foot access ramp, but all within acceptable slopes for those types of vehicles, and it'll be a road construction.
Would it be fair to say that what you see now as you drive down, it will be a much bigger, much more visible, much larger looking operation?
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you.
Who's next? I'm sorry?
Barbara.
Oh, Barbara, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Barbara Curtis from Carpenter Square. A couple of questions. First of all, the multi-criteria analysis. There's no consideration given to what happens when you have a higher flow rate discharging to the canal and out into the bay, and at lower quality than we get from the membrane technology that's currently in use. And so what's going to happen to the canal front properties, the adjacent wetlands, and the bay out near the discharge at Roosevelt Inlet? And why was that not considered as part of the analysis? That's one question. Second question is the treatment technology that was selected for purposes of comparison. I think that, that consultants did a great job for consistency and thoroughness, and I actually read the whole report and have pages and pages of questions and things that I won't bore you with now, but there are new technologies out there that were not considered, that take up less space, are easier to operate, are more environmentally friendly, and are less costly to build and to operate. And those were not considered. So if we wanted to look at something like the 2B option, I think the numbers you give are higher than they need to be. I also have a bunch of comments, but I'll leave things to questions right now.
I don't know, Tom, is it something you want to quickly answer, or?
Yeah, I'll try to give some brief answers and then we'll provide a written response. In terms of the MCA, there is an MCA, an evaluation criteria for water quality impacts on the canal, which is one of the most critical ones. It has the highest weighting. Now that's in terms of water quality. In terms of the issue of being a lower quality, again, this comes into the content I presented about what the treatment facility does today, basically operating well under capacity, versus what the existing facility will do once it reaches capacity, and the fact that the future facilities with the higher flow will actually maintain a lower nutrient concentration going into the canal. In terms of the additional flow going into the canal, we acknowledge there's uncertainty there, and in the next stages that are outlined in the report, and that I think we'll come to shortly, one of the critical tasks is to undertake modelling for the canal to accurately get an understanding on what the impacts of the discharge would be, both in terms of the volumetric flow rate and the treated effluent quality on the surrounding areas. So it's part of the next stage. It wasn't part of the concept level study, just because it's much more in depth than what will be done now. Does that answer that at a very high level?
Well, I think one of the questions, chime in, where Barbara is coming from, is that alternative technologies. There was a plant that Barbara provided a link to, and I have talked to up in Phoenixville, which is using composting and those, but it's a first of a kind plant, and it's never been licensed in Delaware, and I think that was one of the concerns of going to a first of a kind plant.
Yeah, that was something I raised last year.
Right.
But there is another technology out there called Nerita, and there are 70 plants either in operation or under construction throughout the world. And it's got some really impressive stuff about it. 75% less land use, 30% less energy use, basically fully automated. It's activated sludge, but instead of tiny grains, it's what is it? It's some kind of a granule thing, and there's both aerobic and anaerobic treatment within the granules, and the settling rate, instead of being about 1 meter per hour, which you get with activated sludge, it's 15 meters per hour. And so there's lots and lots of advantages in a new plant. And we are the first town in the first state, and I'd like us to be first in wastewater treatment and environmental protection and energy conservation.
All right, well, we'll take that in advisement, and we could, or do you?
Sorry, just one more point on that. So this is the first stage. This is just concept development, and through the design phase, I think there would absolutely be a task within that to look at alternative technologies, look at other ways of doing it, but that will be part of a future design development phase, rather than necessarily looking at it at this concept stage, but absolutely be part of the process to review all of those options.
Hans, do you have any information?
Yeah, I'd just like to refer the public to the Appendix A, because as was pointed out by Tom earlier, as the existing facility, even with the fourth membrane reactor, approaches the full design flow, you can see that the quality is really the worst quality of all options, and that's the 2050 scenario. So, we should not compare what is today with how is things going to look in 2050. Tom said it earlier, and I just didn't want it to get lost.
So we had a question online about when will a decision be made on how you're going to proceed? And then we have Mr. Ennis.
All right, well, I'll hold that one in abatement because that's at the end, but Dave, go ahead.
My name is Dave Ennis, and I live at 50 Harborview Road in Lewis. I'd like to move off of the engineering for just a moment and talk a little bit to the Board of Public Works on a philosophical question. Lewis, as surrounded by county property, several years, one of the issues that became a very quick lightning point for the citizens in Lewis had to do with a property called Harbor Point. The county approved 8 feet or 12 feet of fill. I'm not sure which. Maybe the county officials here tonight can help me with that description, but I believe it was multiple feet of fill on the property that was owned adjoining the Great Marsh and the borders of the city of Lewis. It's my feeling that while you were in negotiations to change your relationship with the county, I would like to encourage you to think about having a committee for the soft issues. What are the structures of the county plans that will be different than the city of Lewis plans, so that we don't continue to have the explosive growth wherever there may be borders available. I am deeply concerned, and I think many other residents are, that our marriage with the county may not be a marriage of like philosophy. And I'm just interested that you think about having a committee to discuss those soft issues, if I may.
Okay.
It appears to me that one of the great concerns of the young lady's question over here is, if we read in the paper every summer that the swimming areas are contaminated by NDENREC's definition, we don't want to dump more water into the water that the Lewis residents swim in. It seems to me we ought to have it in some other form. And I don't think I know the answer to that, but your options are multiple. But if you put water, dirty water into the bay or into the ocean, and it comes back and haunts us, we're destroying the community that we all love. I thank you very much.
So I guess two comments. The first one is that relative to growth in those areas, that's outside of our purview. You know, we are the utility, and just as Hans is the utility for the county. You know, county council, county planning commission, the city of Lewis, and the city planning commission are responsible for growth. So if I would encourage anyone who has issues with growth and those aspects, those are the bodies that need to address that. That's not something that the BPW has any control over. Secondly, with respect to the contamination, you know, I mean, we're all very sensitive to that. But I will say though is that on the cases that, and you correct me, Austin, all of the ones that have come out recently relative to contamination on the beaches have all been traced back genetically to livestock, other type of contamination. It's not Lewis water going into the canal. It's not Sussex County's water going into the canal. It's the runoff from agricultural lands, geese, all of that. So it is something that we are all dependent upon, but it's really outside of the scope of the wastewater treatment plant. So.
Might I offer a suggestion that you consider a committee of both the city and the BPW to think about conversations with the county, because I do agree with you that there's a jurisdictional question, but I do think that there ought to be a thought about the soft relationships. And I think if we're going to continue to have developments on the edge of the city of Lewis where 10, 12 feet of fill are permitted by a county planning issue, it seems to me that's contrary to the goals and objectives of the city of Lewis. And whether it's under your jurisdiction or under the city's, it seems to me that jointly you ought to think about that.
Okay, we'll take that, we'll note that and talk with the city, so.
Over here. Chip Davis, 115 East 3rd Street. I just want to piggyback on what Mr. Ennis just said, and I echo that sentiment exactly. I think you need to think long and hard before you go in with the county on anything. It's just my personal feeling. What's happened outside of the city limits is just a travesty. And to me, there's no end to that. And if they're coming to us because they have an issue, in my opinion. Rehoboth turned them down. Now they've come to us. So there's a reason for that. And I do have one question on under the study criteria on the wastewater flow rates, it says under current zoning designations, does that refer to city or is that county?
I believe that's this.
It's on number 2 under
That's-
study criteria, wastewater flow rates.
That was our
Oh, yeah, yeah, so that was all based upon our build-out calculations for what's in our jurisdiction,
Just
not the
Just the
county.
city, not the
Yeah.
county. Okay, thank you.
Those things that we can control.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Barbara Warnow. I live at Port Louis, out on the beach. And I have a couple questions. I'm concerned that all of this calculations are only 25 years out. I mean, that's nothing. And if you compare to when the current facility was built, and then it was upgraded, correct? At some point, I think I was still living here then. And I don't know those dates. I'm curious if anybody knows those dates and how they compared to,
Well, the current facility
yeah,
was upgraded in 2007. That's when we went to the MBR technology.
And when was it built?
The original plan,
I think it was the 50s.
yeah,
50s.
All right, so 2007, you know, and now we're looking at doing something really major, so it's not that long. And I just wonder if there's any way to project, when you reach, you know, 2050, what do you do next? You really need to have a bigger plan, a longer range plan. That concerns me. And now also, I'm equally concerned, as other people have mentioned, about discharge into the bay and into the wetlands. I mean, I think that is just scary. And humans repeatedly, you know, do these things they think are really bright and great solutions, only to have us living with conditions that, you know, decades and decades ago were considered bright moves. I mean, we overfish. We're still overfishing. You can hardly catch any fish unless you're 400, you know, just way out there in the ocean in a boat. You can't, you know, hardly any fishing goes on the beach the way Michael used to love to do, even on our pier. So I just think you really need to think beyond what you can see in front of you and what many of you will live to experience. I think I'm just really worried it's very short-sighted. And also, I think anytime you get married, like you're going to get married to Sussex County, I mean, that's a biggie, and that has so many ramifications, and everybody might be being really honest about what they currently, including the county, about that they perceived how this is going to work out, and everybody's going to be happy about it. But we all know that usually doesn't work that way, and when push comes to shove, I mean, I think they've got a lot, you know, bigger sticks than we have. We're just going to be one of sort of the pawns. So I just think, you know, a lot, and I agree with the suggestions, you know, for more progressive solutions. I was thinking of that, I just didn't know any of that stuff. And, you know, I think you really do have to pause and try and think outside the box. You know, this is big decisions, and they're going to have a lot of ramifications. And I just would caution you on that. Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, Barbara.
This is a fantastic presentation. Very impressive.
And then Barbara.
I was just going to add, so one of the things, and Chip kind of mentioned it, is that, you know, how this all started was back in, I believe it was September of 21. We had a workshop in which we sat down about mitigation kind of pass forward, because, you know, we talk about it on the water side. We have the Tidewater interconnection, so if anything were to happen, we have that there. And really on the wastewater side, that doesn't exist as of today. And so Sussex County has the ability to send flow to us. And so when we were brainstorming back in September of 21, and Hans was there, and it was a workshop, actually Mr. Schaefer attended as well, we had talked about actually reverting flow, so that if we ever had an issue, kind of like what happened in August of 2021, we could send flow in the opposite direction, which kind of helps us and makes us become more agile. And I think that's kind of what started these conversations about having, what I deem is probably one of the hardest decisions that this board has before them, and what previous boards have had when they've come to take on debt of this caliber. So I appreciate you guys engaging and wanting to be here and talk through that. And the same thing with Hans and Todd, GHD, and the board for taking it on.
May I add something, Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
I like the marriage analogy. I like to pick up on that the Lewis Board of Public Works and the county have been engaged since 2016. we have an agreement which is really mutually beneficial, and maybe we are ready to tie the knot.
Yeah, I think that's true, I'm sure. And you both have jobs. I just think the county makes a lot more money than the city does. And you know what happens in a marriage when that happens.
And I think since we're all married, we get into some other legal issues there too. But
I had a question to follow up on this question about land use. The network areas, you say north and south network or collection area, are there maps anywhere that show what the territory is that we're talking about? Because I think some is in the county and some is in the city in terms of zoning.
Yes.
I'd be curious if we could see.
yeah, that's correct. We do serve, by our charter, we're allowed to serve up to 2 miles outside of the city limits if a CPCN hasn't been already issued to someone else. So it's basically the city, but there are some portions that are outside.
As a matter of fact, you can go to the county website and you can see the Lewis Board of Public Works service territory, which is significantly larger than the city limits.
Good evening. I'm Donnell White on Marina Drive, and thank you very much for the presentation. It's very, very interesting. I had a question about the use now. I think it says in here that Lewis is using about 60% capacity, but it was built for 100%, obviously, and that Sussex County uses it during the winter. But then we're going to be sharing if we go to 3A or 3B, 50-50. So I was thinking Sussex is so much bigger than Lewis, they're going to need more than 50%. And what happens if it doesn't, I can't quite figure out the evenness of it.
So I guess just a little clarification. The county operates other wastewater treatment facilities. So we're only talking about Wolf Neck and that area. So the sharing, the 1.75 million from the county is what we would agree to take from them. Currently, we can take up to 500,000 gallons from them based upon what our loads are. So we would never be considering a facility that was 50% of all the total county and 50% and Lewis. I hope that clears that up.
But there is something I'd like to add maybe for further clarification. Ma'am, the assumption for the O&M cost was based on a 50-50. But let's say if there is a 55-45, the bill will be 55-45 because it's flow-based. But in order to do the evaluation, that's where we said both have an equal allocation, so why don't we just split the O&M evenly? But it's also clearly stated in the report and the presentation that the end result is flow-based. It is not the intent of the county, just because we flow 55%, to charge the Lewis Board of Public Works 50. No, Flow-based means it's flow-based, so.
And, very good, Hans, and that's exactly the way the arrangement works the opposite way right now is we bill the county based upon how much flow we take. So, you know, if we're only taking 100,000 gallons, or we take 500,000 gallons, the fee is different. So it would be the same thing flipped. Do we have anyone else online? No? Okay, good.
Okay, I'm back. I know you're going to address the timing issue next, but a thought about that. The timing is really being dictated for a decision, is really being dictated because the county has to make its plans, is my understanding. If we took the county out of the picture and just operated our current wastewater treatment plant with some minor mitigation impacts over the next few years, we might have the time to come to a much more rational, logical, and comfortable decision for where we would be in control, the people of Lewis, rather than these politicians in Sussex County. Nothing against the wastewater treatment plant operators, but the politicians in Sussex County, none of us trust. Another thing is a question. You know, I understand there will be a place on the BPW website where we can submit our comments. I wondered, to encourage really understanding what the people in the city want, what about putting the options up there, allowing people to enter their address and select an option as a preference? That will make it a lot less onerous for people who are reluctant to submit comments. But then you will know what the mood of the city is. Another thing that concerns me, and it's been raised, is what's going to happen to the site, you know, when the building and equipment is demolished. And it's my understanding that that used to be the city dump years ago. So I would be unofficially, yes? And that's why it's higher than the surrounding market. So, you know, I would be very concerned about putting homes there. But if we end up deciding we're content with losing control to the county about our wastewater treatment, how about taking some control back about energy and using that site for, say, a wind farm, battery storage, or a solar farm or something. And so then we will feel like our city is doing something right.
Thank you. We have any other questions from the audience? Anything online? Oh, Dave?
I may be reaching for stars here, but I have the impression that there are for-profit entities running sewer systems in Sussex County, but they may not be operating treatment plants. Are there any other options with any of the businesses that might be in existence? I have the impression on the other side of Route 1, behind Home Depot, and perhaps behind Lowe's, that there are houses there that are served by for-profit wastewater systems. Am I correct or incorrect with that?
Yeah, I think, yes, I think that is true, and especially for smaller operations, there are contract operators that are operating those, but.
Well, Artesian has quite a network.
Yeah.
They're putting in a new treatment plant over by Ellendale. Yeah, that's a for-profit treatment facility, but it doesn't serve this area, so.
Perhaps if that working committee I was suggesting could take a look at the other option beyond the county. I'm not trying to discourage the county discussion. I do have a concern about the philosophy
other questions? All right.
Wait, got a couple.
Oh, I'm sorry. You were hiding behind the column.
My name is Bob Heffernan. I live on Railroad Avenue. Really, what's the approval process? Do you all decide and then mayor and city council get a vote or not? Do the citizens of Lewis get a vote or not?
Okay, so I'll cover that at the end. Is there any other questions before I get to that?
Aaron has one.
Aaron Marshall, Cape Gazette. I have two, but you're probably not going to answer one. Which option do you think is the best option?
No comment. No, frankly, because I think, as I said before, at the end of the day, there are technical solutions, there are political solutions, there are environmental solutions, and, you know, they have pros and cons. And so we're here to listen, to understand what the public weighs or how they weigh each one of them. So, you know, we as a board, I mean, we think that the technical options as presented by GHD are viable or all viable. But the question is that, you know, we have 20 million and we have 200 million. And what are the trade-offs? And that's why we're here listening to you.
Okay, thank you.